Since the time of Cain and Able, jealousy has caused havoc on family relationships. Jealousy among siblings or between husband and wife can be detrimental to the health of the family unit. In today's program, we want to examine this topic in light of what the Bible has to say, and to help us all to come to realize the dangers that lurk in a jealous mind. So stay with us, and we'll be back in just a moment to begin our study of a program that we've entitled, Understanding Jealousy.
How do you explain? How do you describe?
In Him, all families are blessed. Join our discussion on Fabric of Family.
I once heard of a fictitious story of two shopkeepers who were bitter rivals. Their stores were directly across the street from each other, and they would spend each day keeping track of each other's business. If one got a customer, he would smile in triumph at his rival. Well, one night, an angel appeared to one of the shopkeepers in a dream and said, "I'll give you anything you ask, but whatever you receive, your competitor will receive twice as much." Would you be rich? You can be very rich, but he'll be twice as wealthy. Do you wish to live a long and healthy life? You can, but his life will be longer and healthier. So what is your desire? The man frowned. He thought for a moment, and then he said, "Here is my request. Strike me blind in one eye." You see, that's what jealousy does to us. It prohibits us from rejoicing with those who rejoice and leaves us empty and cold inside. It not only appears in our relationships with those who live in our community, but tragically, even within the family itself, jealousy will sometimes appear. An Irish novelist and playwright, Samuel Beckett, received great recognition for his work, but not everyone savored his accomplishments. Beckett's marriage, in fact, was soured by his wife's jealousy over his growing fame and success as a writer. One day in 1969, his wife Suzanne answered the telephone, listened for a moment, and spoke briefly, and then hung up. She then turned to Beckett, and with a stricken look, she whispered, "What a catastrophe!" Was it a devastating personal tragedy? No. She had just learned that Beckett had been awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. You see, jealousy is sinful and a sad disposition that eats away at our inner peace and destroys family relationships. This is our program on jealousy and actually learning to understand jealousy and what it's all about. And as you can see, I have with me two guests who have been with us in recent times talking about different topics, but we're glad that they're back to talk about the subject of jealousy. I have with us Wes Ayers. Wes here is sitting to my left here. Wes is the youth and family minister for the Jackson Heights Church of Christ. That's the congregation that I preach for. It's also the host congregation for Fabric of Family. And Wes has been with us and done many different things on the program. He has been out doing some street interviews from time to time, and he's also participated in our Word for the Family segment. But he's also been on some of our panel discussions, and he's going to be on the program today. And sitting beside Wes Ayers is a friend of our program here, Fabric of Family, Stan Dean. Stan preaches for the Killen Church of Christ in Killen, Alabama. And Killen is not very, very far from Florence. In fact, it's just a stone's throw from Florence, Alabama. And Stan's a great gospel preacher. He's been doing a wonderful job there with the Killen Church of Christ. I hear so many wonderful things that the church there does, and just excited to have him here. And I know that a number of their members watch the program on a regular basis. And we appreciate so much the good brethren there at the Killen Church of Christ. But Stan, as I said, has been with us in previous broadcasts, and he's going to be on our panel today. We're going to go ahead and get right into our questions. Brethren, I want to ask you this question. What does the Bible say about jealousy?
Well, several things.
Kind of an open-ended question.
You're right.
You can go a lot of different directions.
About being a work of the flesh, for one thing, so we know it's not from God. It's something that's bad. It destroys us, it destroys others. In fact, Solomon said it's a rottenness of the bones. So jealousy, envy, first cousin of that, I suppose, always are spoken of in very negative terms, generally speaking, especially that of man in the Bible.
Okay. That's what I was going to say. It's just something that when you find that the Bible is regarding jealousy, it's just held in such a negative light. And it can do so many things to us personally, but it can really, really, really tear at the foundation of our family.
Are there any examples that come to mind from the Bible of individuals who, because of jealousy, well, they engaged in sin?
You don't have to go very far, in fact. In fact, in the first family, we learned that Cain was jealous of Abel because God accepted Abel's offering, but not his. And so because of jealousy, it ended up with him killing his brother. I guess that's the extreme of sibling rivalry. But still, we know that there was a bitterness within, a jealousy and envy that was there that we see that is destructive from the get-go.
Look at David. He coveted another man's wife.
Yeah.
He was jealous of what he had. And that caused a whole lot of problems for him as well.
Yeah.
So David and Cain.
Sure. Saul loved David.
Saul, yes.
Right,
yeah. Saul was jealous over, I suppose, the glory that David was getting. You remember the people were crying out, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s.
Right.
And Saul didn't take kindly to that being put, second fiddle behind the younger David. And so he was jealous over that.
And his intention was to kill him as well. So there again, we see the destructive nature of it.
Yeah, and jealousy is something that spurs that very act out of people today. There are people who are killed today because of someone who, in a jealous rage, takes the life of someone else. Any others that come to mind?
Well, those are some of the major ones, I guess, that I think about. And then you turn to the New Testament and you learn that even the apostles had some problems with wanting to be the greatest in the kingdom.
Yes,
and they're kind of jealous of one another as who was going to get that spot. So there was a sense of jealousy there. So really pretty much from Genesis to Revelation, we find it pretty often. That's right.
Any principles that we can draw from some of these examples that we've mentioned that can help us in our own life as far as jealousy is concerned?
I think one thing that we find that is a constant tie-in to these stories is it just doesn't do you any good. The end result is always something negative. So nothing positive comes from being jealous of another individual's possessions, belongings, whatever it may be that you're jealous of. There's nothing positive that comes as the end result.
Right. Of course, we talked about how that many times it's led like to killings and such like. But going back to the verse in Proverbs, it says it kills us. It's a rottenness of the bones. So we know it may be that we could be jealous of someone else and they may not even know it. We may never act out on them, but yet it may eat us up on the inside.
Well, we've talked about how jealousy is bad, but, maybe just to throw a kink in the rope here just a bit, doesn't the Bible talk about God being a jealous God?
It does.
It does, yeah.
However, there's a difference.
Okay, I guess that's where I'm wanting to go here.
Right.
Someone might say, God's a jealous God, and so why is it wrong for us to be jealous? Don't we want to be like God?
I guess I would illustrate that like this. There's a sense in which I can be jealous of my wife. There's a sense that would be positive. There's another sense that would be negative. For example, I love my wife, and she's a great communicator. She's very outgoing. I don't mind sharing her in a social way with other people. However, there's a relationship that I enjoy with my wife that I do not want to share her with other people. And I think that when we think about God's jealousy, it isn't something where He's suspicious of us, something where He's thinking evil thoughts about us, but He wants us. There's a special relationship that we enjoy with Him that He deserves, one that He wants, and one where if we go astray from that He is going to be disappointed in us if we do.
I agree. I think it's crucial for us to separate the two. being jealous of someone else or God being a jealous God. There are traits about my wife that she possesses that I wish I could do better. You know, her being on time and her developmental skills in helping our son to grow with different things. I wish I could do that. There are things that I wish I could do.
Sure.
Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm jealous or envious of those things. I just wish I could have those things. But there are some spouses who are completely jealous of their spouse, and it leads to a big problem.
Well, let's think about that for just a moment. How does jealousy affect our family relationships?
Well, if a man is jealous of his wife, for example, what we're saying is not what we talked about a moment ago, that he just feels like that there's a certain part of their lives that only the two of them should share. I think everybody understands that. But if he's suspicious of her, if he's thinking she's running around on me, or any time that she goes to the grocery store, if she stays 5-10 minutes longer than he thinks she ought to stay, then obviously there's something that's not healthy about that. He's suspicious, there are things, and probably not warranted. But it's going to make not only his life miserable, but he's going to make her miserable, because she's going to think, you know, he's going to feel like I'm doing something I shouldn't do. And I know personally of those situations, and they are miserable situations in families, and I feel for those families.
And a lot of times you'll see those situations deteriorate to the point of the marriage is dissolved.
Sure.
Because, you know, a person just says, I'm not going to live this way anymore.
Right.
Sometimes it's necessary for us also to find in the situation, like you were given an example of, where does the jealousy come from? What is it that maybe the husband who's wondering, well, she's been gone to the grocery store 5 minutes too long. Well, what puts that idea into your mind?
Right.
Where does that idea generate from? Why do you have that jealous feeling? Sometimes we need to ask those questions as well.
True.
But it's not just a feeling or emotion that, or an attribute that someone possesses that may be a husband or a wife, but you can also see jealousy in the sibling relationship as well.
Right.
And I think about over in the Old Testament, the story of Joseph. You remember his brothers?
Sure.
And how that they were jealous of their younger brother because the father tended to give him a little more attention, made him the coat of colors, and how that eventually led to, well, a great family tragedy, and they sold their brother into slavery.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes you see that even in siblings, where siblings are at one another or want the worst of the other sibling because of jealousy.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's interesting about the story of Joseph is they hated him so much that they took his coat with blood on it and said, look, he's dead, okay, now take care of us.
Yeah.
It's basically what they were insinuating.
And had it not been for Reuben, the older brother, they would have killed him.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just, when you're talking about sibling jealousy, you know, there are things that my sister does, and she's 15, and I admire it. You know, I'm not necessarily jealous of it. There are some things that she has. She's very musically inclined, and at 15, I wish I could have been as musically inclined as she was. But, you know, something as simple as that, sometimes you'll see siblings argue, fuss, fight, sometimes to the point where it becomes something major over something as simple as playing an instrument.
Yeah, it can be. And going back to the story of Joseph again, isn't it sad that his father actually set up that situation?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, it seemed that Joseph in a lot of cases was pretty innocent of the whole thing. Dad was the one that made the difference in the kids. And actually, and I think that as parents, we need to be careful that we don't set up our kids for that kind of situation.
Excellent point. Showing favoritism of one child over the next. I mean, we can create a scenario in which jealousy will be the end product amongst our own children.
Right.
Well, those are some excellent thoughts that y'all shared thus far, but we're going to take just a break in our panel discussion, and we're going to see a segment called Word for the Family. And so in just a moment, we'll be back to continue our discussion.
Glory, hallelujah. Hey, praise God Jehovah. Amen. Amen. Amen.
How do we become great? Webster's dictionary defines great as something that is notably large in size or full of emotion, something that's chief or preeminent over others. When we think about greatness, and we think about the world of sports, Do you know who is ranked as the greatest athlete of all time? He just recently celebrated his 50th birthday, and he's known by his initials, MJ. Michael Jordan, who was born on the 17th day of February in 1963. You know, he's known everywhere by his number, the number 23. Michael Jordan was a slam dunk champion, a Rookie of the Year in 1984, a 10-time scoring champion, a 6-time NBA champion, and an inductee into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2009. But when we're talking about greatness, and we're talking about greatness in our lives and in our family lives, we have to think about God's greatness. If we want our family lives to be great, and we want our personal lives to be great, we have to look at God's greatness first and foremost. We look at Psalm chapter 48 and verse 1 where it says, "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, His holy mountain." Then we look at 1 John chapter 4 and verse 4 where the Bible tells us, "Little children, you are from God and have overcome them. For He who is in you is greater than he who is in the world." See, this old world that we live in, sometimes it pulls at us. And it pulls away from the great things that we have going on within our families and within our lives and within our family lives. But see, God has overcome the world. So for our families to be great, we have to understand God's greatness. Isn't our love within our families great? Isn't it great to be able to see your spouse or to see your children or your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, aunts, uncles, brothers and sisters? And when we see the love that we have for them, isn't it great? But we look at God's love and how great God's love is. And we read from our Bibles in Psalm 103 verse 11 where the Bible says, "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is His steadfast love toward those who fear Him." John chapter 15 and verse 13 says that greater love has no one than this, that someone may lay down his life for his friends. You see, God's love is great. Do you know what it's like when someone is faithful to you? When a member of your family is faithful, a husband and wife are faithful for over 50 years. How great is that? When a brother and a sister stand beside one another and they stand true and they're faithful to one another. And they stand beside one another in times of trial and tribulations. But look at God's faithfulness. And how great is God's faithfulness to us. See, Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 through 24 read, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, and His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul." Hebrews chapter 10 verse 23 says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for He who promised is faithful." God's faithfulness is great. But when we look at our family lives and we want our family lives to be something great, we want our family relationships to be great, we have to look at the greatest things we have. And the greatest is love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 13 says, "So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest is love." Then we go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 3, where the Bible tells us, "Remembering before our God and Father your work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. For we know, brothers, loved by God, that He has chosen you." See, great is love, and love is great. And when we have that within our families will be great. But we have to be humble. The greatest thing about a family relationship is when we are humble. Matthew chapter 18 and verse 4 says, "Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And Matthew 23 and verse 11, "The greatest among you shall be your servant." Those who are humble, those who are kind, and those who love are the building blocks to a great family. But one thing to always keep in mind when we're wanting to build great families and great family relationships, we must go to John chapter 3 and verse 30, where the Bible reminds us that He must increase, but I must decrease. Show love within your families. Become something great to your family. Be humble. Put God first. Put your family first, and your family will be great. This has been a Word for the Family. I'm Wes Ayers from the Jackson Heights Church of Christ.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that Word for the Family segment. We're going to continue our discussion with Stan Dean, the evangelist for the Killen Church of Christ in Killen, Alabama, and with Wes Ayers, who is the youth and family minister with the Jackson Heights Church of Christ in Florence, Alabama. We were talking about jealousy, and I want us to address this question initially. What are some sources of jealousy that we sometimes see within a marriage?
I think a lot of times when you're looking at the job situation, one thing that I have noticed in some, I've had the opportunity to sit in some counseling situations with some ministers who have been around and who have experienced this more often than I have, and I've had the privilege of sitting in with them to learn some things. And a lot of times if the wife happens to make a little more money, a lot of times the husband is very jealous, and that can lead into some different things that he's jealous of about his spouse, and it kind of makes him feel inferior, which leads to a jealousy, which leads to an anger, which leads to resentment. Who knows what, resentment, and just several different things.
Yeah. Could be education. That can kind of play in the same way if maybe one or the other goes on to get a higher degree than the other feels like, well, you're up with a higher echelon and we don't connect anymore. It could be that. Sure. And I think about a lot of things like that, but it may be maybe their personalities. Maybe one's an extrovert and the other's an introvert. So one wants to go home at night and sit there and watch TV. The other says, I'd rather be out with the crowd. And maybe the introvert says, I would like to do that, but I don't really feel comfortable with that, and I don't like you doing it. So he's jealous of that situation. And so just a lot of things, really, if we, I guess, get down to it.
Sure. A lot of different ways in which jealousy can manifest itself in a married couple's relationship.
Right.
What about as far as children are concerned?
I think a lot of times you'll see if, let's say for instance, someone's really good at sports, then you have another child who's not so good at sports.
Right.
Well, if I'm a former sports standout in high school as a father, well, I'm naturally going to cater to the child who's in sports, right? So maybe I show a little favoritism toward that child. Well, the other child who's not so involved in sports begins to feel neglected, feels a little anger toward their sibling, a little jealousy, and they'll act out on that. A number of ways that they can act out on that, from simple, harmless words, which we all know are not that harmless. They're pretty harmful at times. The words that we say, to major actions of rage.
Think about that, or just comparing one child against the other. Saying, why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like your sister? Oh man, that's awful. And it may be that child could never meet the attainment of what they're trying to say, but what the message that comes across from the parent is, that child is better than you are. And obviously for a child, that's going to bring out a sense of jealousy of that child, wishing that he could be like that child.
Right.
And we brought out in our former segment, panel discussion, about how that sometimes parents contribute to jealousy among siblings and may not even realize it. And again, that's what we're talking about here. Right. And I think it's very important this is re-emphasized, is that, if I'm a parent and I'm watching this program today, I need to especially remember the importance of valuing each child independently and not pitting one child against the other child, because though my intentions may be possibly to motivate one child to accomplish something in their life that this other child has accomplished, at the same time that may also prompt that child to be jealous and can hurt that child's self-esteem and can be very destructive. So we just need to think about that as parents.
We do.
And the way in which we go about our parenting sometimes. Well, what are some preventive steps that parents can do to help their children not develop an unhealthy jealousy in their life? What are some things they can do?
Well, I think that there again, if we, going back to that illustration of being maybe a parent that is more, or shows more favoritism toward one child than the other, I think that he needs to let every child know that they're all special to him. I don't think there's anybody, if we think about the Heavenly Father, that feels that somebody is more important than we are. I think about the Apostle Paul. He was extremely talented and will do more than I ever would think about doing as far as the service of the Lord. But when I read God's Word, I don't feel that there's any difference. That I feel he loves me just as much as he loved Paul. And I think with our children, that's what they need to know, that they're loved for what they are, and they're not loved just for what they can do or play ball, whatever the case might be, or their talents, whatever they might be, but they're loved for what they are.
And to recognize children are different.
Sure.
And because of that, they're going to have different talents, they're going to have different abilities, and some are going to shine more in one area, and the other child may shine more in another area. But to let them know that whatever area they shine in, they're important.
Yeah, spotlight them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Praise them for it. Certainly that's some good advice for parents to follow. Well, what can a spouse do? Maybe a spouse who has an overly jealous husband or perhaps an overly jealous wife. And because of that jealousy, it's really beginning to hurt the relationship. What can that spouse do to help in that situation?
That's a tough question, obviously, because there are a lot of implications to that.
Yes, there are.
But I think, first of all, if it's possible, sit down with that mate and say, what is causing these feelings of insecurity in you about me? There may be some things. He might say, what's the way you dress? Or she might say, well, it's the way you go out and do whatever. And I think that we need to have some understanding of why they feel the way they do. Now, they may not be warranted, but we need to have some understanding. And I think in turn, we need to let them know how it makes us feel when they act that way toward us, when they are accusing us of things that we know that we're not guilty of doing and that kind of thing.
Well, quickly, what can a church do then? Maybe church leaders who are watching the program today and say, you know, we want to make sure this is addressed to our families.
I think one thing that is crucial is we have to show the importance of how the family will influence the church family. You know, if your family if within your personal families there's some jealousy, that's eventually going to lead into your church family. You're going to be jealous of that person who is making more money at church, that person who's involved in more in church. That's going to lead to a lot of things.
Yeah, and just like I said, with our children, as adults, we need to know the same thing, that we're valued for what we are and not for what we aren't.
James wrote, "From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence even of your lust that war in your members?" James chapter 4 and verse 1. So many of the family wars that go on in the home, they are fueled by our own selfish wants and desires. And one of the major catalysts for many of these battles that go within the family unit is jealousy. As members of a family and children of God, let us learn the dangers of having a spirit of jealousy and put away jealous behaviors and thoughts that undermine the joy and happiness in our relationships. So for the Gospel Broadcasting Network, Insane Video Productions, and the Jackson Heights Church of Christ in Florence, Alabama, I'm Barry Gilreath Jr., wishing you a wonderful week and a happy family till we meet again.